Hello and welcome to the week that really was with John McGurk and Sarah Ryan for this week ending the 19th of December 2025. And I am delighted to say she is back for our last podcast of the year. Sarah has returned from her temporary exile. How are you? It is great to see you.
Thanks, John. Did you miss me?
I think the viewers missed you and the listeners missed you. Oh, I was fine. I had great company. I had Leisha de Bruin, I had Cormac Lucy. I was fine. Barely thought about you at all, if I'm honest.
Worthy replacements. I did watch. They were both very good and very interesting. So thanks if you're listening. Filling it.
No, we are glad to have you back. I will talk about that in a second, but first to tell people at the start of the podcast what we'll be talking about today. We'll be running through Fianna Fáil's turmoil over the last week. Obviously, the biggest political story in the country is whether Micheál Martin will hold on to his job, but we'll talk about that. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the international stuff and the kind of conversational trends on the right, because everyone's watching this Candace Owens woman. So we're going to talk about that. We're also going to talk about the row that erupted, it's a sort of intra-Gript row that erupted last week about Nick Fuentes. Laura Perrin said he was a big old virgin and no one should be following him. And Ben Scallon and Jason took to their podcast and were like, well, nothing wrong with being a virgin and Laura shouldn't have attacked him. So we'll talk about that. We will talk about what happened in Australia, which I think actually leads on from that conversation. I will talk a little bit about an article that annoyed Sarah in the Times about how teenage boys and younger need to have anti-misogyny courses drummed into their skulls. It promises to be an engaging hour. But first of all, Sarah, tell the people what happened to you, because it's now all over and you have made a recovery and you're back to yourself.
Yeah, so to keep it brief, in the summer, I said to people that I had a pain in my back. I thought it was sciatic pain. Thought it was a slip disc. I was in Greece. Loads of people helped with advice about what to do with sciatica. I came back. I got an MRI in the VHI clinic. In the interim, I ended up in A&E with the pain. The VHI sent over a report while I was in A&E saying there was nothing wrong with my back. No slip disc, nothing wrong. And sorry, there's my doggies. And I went off then for 5 weeks in absolute agony. Really, really difficult kind of mentally to be told there's nothing wrong with you when you know there is. And I did loads of physio as I was told, and I walked every day. Agony, couldn't walk without a limp, whatever. And luckily for me, because I have private health insurance, I was going to a consultant for pain management. And one day I went in and he said, there's something not right. I don't believe that report. I want my own report. And he got his own report in the Mater Hospital where he was. And there was what we now know is a tumour on the bottom of my spine. It's called a schwannoma tumour. It's a tumour that grows in your nerve. And it can't be removed, unfortunately, but they can remove a lot of bone to help it grow. And I suppose so I'm now out of pain. I've had the surgery. I'm out of pain and I'll have to have MRIs and I'll just have to kind of live with it for now or forever. But hopefully it won't cause any problems in the future. But I think what's interesting about it is that if I didn't have, as I was saying to you just there, you get a bill now from the VHI when your operation is covered. First of all, I got a misdiagnosis and that's very annoying. Nobody looked at the MRI properly, it seems. And then I'm wandering around and I just think if I didn't have health insurance and if I wasn't going in and paying for a private pain management consultant to live my life, I'd probably be walking around in agony with this going on. And it's just not really good enough. And that's the kind of health insurance or health system that people live with every day. I'm one of the lucky ones.
Yeah, I mean, I remember, and by the way, I'm not, Sarah's tumour is benign, by the way, for the listeners. I think that's clear from what she's been saying, but just to make it explicitly clear, it's benign.
Phonoma is so you look it up. When I was drugged out of my mind and they were explaining it to me, I remembered it by shawarma, like a kebab, that was just the way I remembered it. But they are by definition, they're benign. Thank God.
No, but I remember, I mean, obviously back in the summer, and folks, I can tell you she was in a lot of pain. A lot of pain. And you were on very strong drugs for the pain. Yeah. And, we did have fun, you and I, over the last couple of weeks after your operation. We had a couple of lengthy phone calls in the evening. We discussed all sorts of matters while you were off your head.
Sorry, the first time it was an accident. The second time you rang me on purpose because you had such a delight with my stoned ramblings the last time that you rang me up. You identified that there might be an opportunity and you rang me up for fun. McGurk.
Yeah, that is. No, but I couldn't possibly comment. All I'll say is that the conversation was very entertaining, but unfortunately can't be broadcast. So we will move on. Look, you're fighting fit. You are back and you're ready to go, and that is I think the main thing. Let's move on to the politics, because obviously you've been laid up for the last couple of weeks. You've had a chance to follow it. This whole business with Micheál Martin. Give us your take.
I mean, do you ever watch The Simpsons when Bart gets really famous and they're like, say the line, say the line? It's like that. They'll do nothing. And they did nothing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm not surprised. Just a lot of shouting and roaring and huffing and puffing and a ridiculous report and attempts to blame it all on Jim Gavin. And is anybody surprised?
Well, I'm not surprised. I mean, obviously, it's fairly obvious that they were, that Micheál Martin was never going to be blamed in a report commissioned by Fianna Fáil. I think that was fairly obvious from the start. But I kind of take the bigger picture view on this. And now I'm going to sound, I was on Niall Boylan's show this week, as I regularly am, and I was talking to him on his podcast, last radio show about this. And I kind of almost felt bad doing it, Sarah, because it's almost lefty, but it's how I feel genuinely. Like, we're in the last week of December. There are, as we record this podcast, 248 people on hospital trolleys around the country. 5 of those are over the age of 85. There are 6,000 children in the country in emergency homelessness accommodation. That's up from 4,600 in January. So we've increased by 1,400 over the course of the year, the number of children in homelessness accommodation. The Children's Hospital, first conceived when you and I hadn't yet made our first communion, it still hasn't been built and is now €1 billion or more over budget. And it just strikes me, the whole thing, I can't get past my head, is that, okay, so Micheál Martin has arguably been the leader of a party and arguably been responsible for wasting €400,000 of that party's money. And they're all up in arms. And yet, the amount of money, public money, that's been wasted on his watch is eye-watering, and none of these people give a shit. And I include the journalists in that, by the way.
Yeah.
Does that make me a lefty bore, or do I have a point? Because I actually can't decide. I think it might make me a lefty bore.
But there's two conversations there. There's the conversation about the waste of money and the internal, we're aware of it, and it's more irritating because Fianna Fáil backbenchers and frontbenchers have, on the record and off the record, been moaning about Micheál for years. And so it's a story because they've made it a story and the journalists make it a story. And yeah, they should be talking about other things, but they're not. Here we are, whinging about Micheál instead of whinging about what Micheál's doing. So it's a story because they make it a story. But of course, I don't think it's lefty. I think what you're describing is not lefty. It's a perfectly normal reaction when people are completely beyond having any expectation of good politics.
Mm-hmm.
Like this is silly stuff. Yeah. No, but this is silly stuff. We shouldn't care about this. This should have been an internal Fianna Fáil row that lasted for a week, and then Micheál was either in or out, and we'd hear the odd whisper about it, and then it'd be over. It's gone on for months.
I was just thinking there. For some reason, it popped into my head as you were talking. I was reading the Irish Independent today at one of those pieces, and they happen. All the papers do them, and it was this woman who's living in London, right? She's Irish, and she's been living in London for like 15 years or something. And she was like, I'm suddenly so proud to be Irish. The country's in such a good place, so creative. You've got your CMAT, you've got your what do you call them, the lads with the battle flags on their head, those lads. You've got your movies, you've got your Sally Rooney writing her books. Ireland's such a dynamic, creative place. And I so often read those articles in Irish newspapers, and I'm like, okay, yeah, we don't live in a shithole. I'm not pretending we live in a shithole, but like, we live in a country where there are there are not sufficient hospital beds, there are not sufficient houses, where the median price of a home in October was €381,000, and you're sitting there in London, kind of going, "Oh, Ireland's so great. I wish I was back there." No, you weren't. And you wouldn't. I was in London quite recently, and I don't think most people will trade it. And yet we have a political system that doesn't want to address any of the problems the country has, wants to say how great the country is, and wants to fall out over Micheál Martin's selection of a candidate in Jim Gavin, which didn't affect a single human being in the country. There's not one person listening to this podcast or not listening to this podcast whose life has been affected in any way, shape, or form by whether Jim Gavin was on the presidential ballot, except for Jim Gavin. And I just find that I just think
got his money back. There's two people who've been affected by it.
that is true. That is true. His former tenant did indeed get his money back. So that was one net positive from the whole thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I just think it says so much about sort of, I know I don't want to put the boot in too much, because I know we have good, honest to goodness, decent Fianna Fáilers who listen to this podcast. But lads, I mean, like, take your heads out of your asses. It's
Yeah.
what I think on this. I mean, the best case scenario is like, say Micheál Martin does get replaced, and then Jim O'Callaghan or somebody else comes in. Can somebody tell me what exactly would change? Like, has Jim O'Callaghan got some massive policy differences with Micheál Martin that we don't know about, or is it just literally a case of we think he'd win more votes? Because I think it's just the latter.
Well, I don't know about that. I think Micheál Martin has definitely had his own personal ideological position that's pulled Fianna Fáil quite left compared to what a lot of the deputies in Fianna Fáil secretly think. So I think Jim O'Callaghan as leader might, on a variety of policy areas, be different. But you don't know until you know. But until we wait and see. But I think Micheál Martin has. If we learn anything from this entire debacle, it's this isn't like you're saying. Okay, fine, it doesn't affect anybody, but anybody who's either even on the periphery of knowing people within Fianna Fáil knows that this top-down, do what I say kind of attitude is the way Micheál Martin has governed Fianna Fáil for a long time. So who knows what kind of amazing ideological legends could be amongst those people who've just kept quiet, because that's the way you survive if you want to have a career in Fianna Fáil for the last 10 years.
I don't know that keeping quiet and what I think is a price I pay for a career in Fianna Fáil, but I'm not one of them. So
we know that me too. But let's wait and see.
Yeah, briefly before we move on to other issues, just I know I'm throwing these at you because we didn't mention them before the call, but there were a couple of significant votes in the Oireachtas this week on sort of what we might call moral and conscience issues. First of all, the Dáil chose not to bring back a bill that would basically permit abortion up until birth. That vote was very narrow. It was 72 to 70. And then in a much wider vote, the Dáil rejected Ruth Coppinger's proposed ban on fox hunting by a vote of 124 to 24. And that was interesting to me because I think it is the first time in recorded human history, Sarah, that I have agreed with Ruth Coppinger on something.
So it's that moment when I was agreeing with elephants.
Yes. Yeah. So stops, a stopped calendar is right once a year, I think is probably the right way to phrase that. Let's talk about the abortion thing first. Obviously, I think people who listen to this podcast and share sort of a broad sort of pro-life conviction will be happy that the bill is not on the table, and are simultaneously dismayed that something that essentially opens the door to abortion up to 9 months was defeated by 2 votes, and which makes every election from a pro-life perspective kind of existential moving forward. What do you make of it?
Obviously we have a position on this and always have. Again, like things we were told would never happen, and it was just for hard cases, and it's just the beginning. It was always the beginning of a creep. I think it's just some of the names that people that I would have thought were pro-life before voting for it were a bit disappointing. But half of Leinster House have been on this journey for that there's a kind of a correlation between their journey and their political their career trajectory, and have gone from being pro-life to pro-choice. I don't want to be defeatist about the issue, but I do think that there's a lot of people who have real moral cowardice about this issue in Leinster House and have for a number of years, and that's really unfortunate.
I find it very interesting that the TDs were given a free vote. On the government side of the house, it should be said, not on every side of the house. I don't think there was a free vote in the Labour Party, for example. Not that they'd need one, but I don't think there was. Well, the government TDs were given a free vote on it. But I find it interesting that they were given a free vote on that, but they weren't given a free vote on the fox hunting bill. Now, I know that there are a good number of people in Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael who wanted to vote for that bill. It's obviously it's a humane issue and it's a moral question. And the government basically decided that the Healy-Rae position on this, which is essentially that all the deer should be exterminated in Killarney and all the foxes should be shot. I'm paraphrasing, but I think they did say at one point that the deer needed to be eradicated in Killarney because they were eating too much. And like, I am surprised that on something like that, no free vote was given, while a free vote was given on abortion, which is objectively a much more serious issue because it involves human beings. I just think there's sort of moral confusion on these issues in the Oireachtas, if I'm honest.
Well, isn't that a microcosm for the entire problem with the Irish political system in general?
Yeah, possibly so. Possibly so. Anyway, we've done enough on Irish politics for 1 year. God knows they'll be back annoying us in January, but we'll enjoy the break moving forward. Let's talk about sort of international culture stuff. Candace Owens. Sometimes we don't talk to people like Candace Owens because some people in our audience don't know who she is or don't pay attention to her. But this woman gets 3 million views every day for her live stream / podcast. You and I, though we have very healthy listenership and viewership, could barely dream of such numbers. You, I think, were at least at one point you were a fan. So
Yeah.
what do you make of where she's gone?
I think she's gone off the rails, to be honest. Back in the day when Candace first started coming onto the scene, she was an amazing Conservative spokesperson. Did really interesting work commenting on basically cultural issues within the Black community in America, the way in which they were accepting of things like that, they were culturally much more accepting of things like the fathers not being part of the children's lives and things like that. She was really, really good, really clever, looks beautiful looking, just a really good spokesperson. And then she started to lose me a couple of years ago. Very deep dive, huge conspiracy theorist about the some of the vaccines, but like not in a, and we've talked about vaccines and my views on vaccines many times on this podcast, so it's not like I'm particularly pro-vaccine, but just like very deep diving, very conspiracy theories without real depth to it. And then she started in on the Bridget Macron is a man thing, and she got really deep into it. And I thought to myself, girl, this woman better have a cock, because the way you are talking as if you've got photos or some kind of evidence or you've got some kind of intel or whatever. And she obviously didn't, because it just sort of flittered away and there was talk about this and talk about that. And then nothing ever came of it. And now it's the Charlie Kirk conspiracy thing. And I just think I'm just disappointed, to be honest, because it's to your point like a minute ago, there's so many things in the world, so many things she could be talking about. And she's talking about conspiracy theories and whipping vulnerable people into frenzies about things. And it's just all a bit of nonsense and time wasting. And it's not my cup of tea at all. And I think it's a real shame of a really bright, potential, really good, conservative talking head that could have been extremely powerful. And now she's just making herself into a kind of a spokesperson of madness.
Well, I blame Donald Trump.
Of course you do.
I'll get to why in a minute, but of course I do. I mean, I couldn't let the last podcast of the year go without saying that I blame Donald Trump for something, right? But I think the whole thing is fascinating. First of all, I think there's a huge. Somebody said to me, some smart person said to me today, I think it was on Twitter, and I can't remember who it was. So if you're listening to this and I'm stealing what you said to me without credit, I apologize. I am trying to credit you, but I don't know your name or can't recall it. But somebody said to me, it's basically, what she's doing is kind of like, the most successful podcast category on earth is true crime, right? And what she's doing is she's taking all these kind of wackadoodle things and kind of serializing them as if they're like a criminal conspiracy theory. And her female audience is actually huge, apparently so, which I think is sort of interesting. But like, I think people talk too much about Candace Owens and Nick Fuentes and Tucker Carlson as kind of as if they are the actors and everyone else consuming them has just no choice but to consume them. I think it's much more interesting what they say about the state of sort of the new right in the West in general. And I say this as somebody who has huge, broad areas of overlap politically with the new right in the West in general, but has for some time been absolutely baffled by the predilection for wackadoodle conspiracy theories.
Yeah.
And the adaptation of crazy positions on issues and turning everything into, the deep state this and the deep state that.
Yeah.
I mean, what you've got here is somebody in Candace Owens who has, people do the same thing that they do with Trump, right? Which is that every time Trump does something that they don't understand, they attribute it to strategy. So it's 3D, it's 4-dimensional chess, right? Trump does something wacky and then it doesn't work out and it's quite a disaster. Oh, well, we just can't see the full picture. So when Candace Owens goes on, as she did a couple of weeks ago on her podcast, and said that Emmanuel Macron had ordered a French hit squad into the United States with the connivance of the Israelis to assassinate her. And then that didn't happen and she just stopped talking about it. People's reaction is, oh, well, you're not seeing all the pieces on the board. I mean, this way of my objection is to the way of thinking that it encourages in people, because what she's doing is encouraging people to start with the conclusion and work back with the evidence, which you should never do. So you start with the conclusion that there was something fishy about Charlie Kirk's death. I'm not even going to try and dissuade people from that, Sarah, because maybe somebody listens to this who thinks there's something fishy from Charlie Kirk's death. Well, if that's what you think, you've got to find the evidence to support that proposition. But what Candace Owens encourages people to do is to assume that the absence of evidence is evidence.
Yeah.
That the stuff that you can't see is more important than what you can see. And she encourages you in your head to fill in the gaps.
Mm.
And that is a destructive way of thinking. You are teaching yourself to be stupid. You're actually teaching yourself to be stupid. What you've got to do is look for the evidence first and then arrive at your conclusion later. And this is what happens right across the board with a lot of these big podcasters. You saw it with the whole QAnon thing in the first Trump term. You see it now with Candace Owens. You see it with a whole bunch of other people, where no matter what you say to them, the key thing, how do you know that you believe in conspiracy theory? You believe in a conspiracy theory when it's unfalsifiable, when there is nothing that anybody could say to you that would satisfy you that the conspiracy didn't happen.
Yeah.
It's like the old joke I've told on the podcast before, that somebody goes up to heaven who's a JFK conspiracy theorist and asks God, my last wish is tell me who really killed JFK. And God says it was Lee Harvey Oswald, who's a lone gunman. And the conspiracy theorist says, I had no idea it went this far to the top. And I think there's something about Candace Owens that is completely along those lines. I think she's destroying brains. I think that's what she's doing.
Yeah, and it's just a shame, because there was a huge potential there for a smart, capable person who had a following, who could talk about things. And if you're to your point, if you have overlapping political views with some of these people, as you do, as I do, it damages it, or it gives the left, an excuse to pull you all together, and it's kind of irritating. I'm like, it's a wasted opportunity, and it makes a mockery of everything that she thinks, some of which I agree with, and I find that irritating.
It's one of the reasons I didn't want Donald Trump to win the election last year. And it is because I knew this kind of thing would happen. And what do I mean by this kind of thing? I mean that Donald Trump has been in office now for 11 months. He gave a big speech this week. He gave a State of the Nation address, which was the most flat thing you've ever seen, in which he tried to insist that the Trump economy is brilliant and it's all Joe Biden's fault, in which he made a series of questionable claims about, he's given himself an A+++ for the economy, when the real standards of living in the United States are falling and the public have an approval rating for him in the 30s on an issue that he said he would solve. And what's happened with him in office is that all the energy on the right has dissipated, and it's become caught up in all these ridiculous internecine culture issues without any focus on actually delivering, what you would want an American government of the right to deliver. And the result is that all these people who would be focused, if there was a Democrat in office, on kind of criticizing the left and coming up with new policies and engaging in actual thoughtful leadership in trying to advance a goal, are instead squabbling with each other over who shot Charlie Kirk and whether Brigitte Macron has balls or not. I mean, just go jump in a lake. This isn't politics. This is why, and I'll bank it right down now that one of my predictions for 2026 will be a Democratic sweep in the midterms next year, because this Trump business and all the associated stuff on the American right is turning into a political catastrophe. And what are you getting in return? What are you getting in return? If you voted for this, what are you actually getting in return? I don't see it. You've gotten a crackdown on immigration. That's it. And if that's your most important issue, then you can text the comments and tell me it was worth it. I got my crackdown on immigration.
Well, you also
But that's it.
No, I don't agree. I don't agree with that. I think you also stopped a march in the other direction. A Kamala Harris presidency would have continued the march on things like the transgender nonsense and all of this, and you definitely have stalled and stopped the progress that they were making in that regard. 100%.
Well, temporarily, but yes, fair enough. Fair enough.
Well,
You make a reasonable point.
temporarily is better than nothing. I mean, do you know what I mean? If Kamala Harris had gotten elected, maybe Brigitte Macron will be in the White House slapping her balls out on the table for all we know, and they wouldn't even care about it. Like, do you know that? So I think Trump. I always thought that it's not about that. I think Trump is this fabulous guy that I want to go for a pint with. It's that something had to be done to stop the absolute march in the complete wrong direction. Anti-man, anti-young people, anti-women, pro-transgender, pro this nonsense. Another win, another affirming vote for people who believe all of the nonsense that I stand against and always will. That's what the Trump presidency was going to deliver, as far as I was concerned. And it did. And maybe you're right. Maybe it's temporary, and maybe it's doing damage to the movement on the right for now. Fine. But there's still a few more years to go. And for now, it's stopped the march in the direction of absolute lunacy, as far as I'm concerned.
Well, it stopped the march in the direction of absolute lunacy in one direction. But we're 11 months into the Trump presidency, and this is where we're at. This is where we're at now in the culture. You go on to your ex and you're getting fed. If you're anyway on the right dog, you're getting fed absolute crazy cook stuff 11 months in. What's it going to be like in 3 years? I mean, revolutions eat themselves. That's what
Yeah.
happens. They eat themselves. And this one is eating itself a whole lot faster than they normally do. I mean, even Robespierre got 5 or 6 years before it happened. So I have anyway, look.
Too soon to tell.
No, I don't think it is. I think it's early enough to see the direction of travel. Candace Owens has 3 million people watching her stream every week. Tucker Carlson has hundreds of thousands of people watching his.
Candace Owens is a podcaster. There'll be others like her. Candace Owens becoming more and more mad is not a status symbol of what's happening with the Trump presidency.
Well, we'll see. We'll see. I'm skeptical. I think you can draw a line between the two. People will fight with me on it. I'm trying to be reasonable about it, but I think this is a broader right wing problem. It's not just confined. You can't put Candace Owens in a box and say, "Oh, it's just her." You can't do that. Anyway, look, let's talk about the other thing I wanted to talk about, because you were away for it, but there was a schism. I'm the editor, and I presided over a schism last week in Griptland, because Laura wrote an article about a week ago in which she basically said that this Nick Fuentes lad, who is another one of these hardcore right-wing streamer dudes, he's a 27-year-old virgin, he says so himself, and she said this made him a bit of a loser and she doesn't understand why men are following him. And then Ben and Jason had their podcast. Ben wrote a very eloquent article in response, in which he said, look, I was a virgin until I got married, and we should encourage people, we shouldn't slag them off for being virgins. And then he and Jason did it on their podcast too. And I was just wondering, what's your opinion on this? Is it correct or incorrect to slag Nick Fuentes off for being a virgin?
I think Nick Fuentes being a virgin is a matter for himself, to be honest. I don't think that everybody subscribes to the culture that you go out and have sex with loads and loads of people before you get married. And that's their own business. I mean, there's also people who,
See, I agree.
it's not that they don't believe in having sex before marriage. They just want to have sex the first time with somebody that they are kind of serious about, or kind of, whatever. And that is becoming harder and harder to meet in a culture which has made sex very transactional. So I think it's none of anybody's business.
Yeah, I think, this is where I kind of, on the one hand, instinctively sided with Ben and Jason, and on the other hand, think they're a little bit naive, because I think if you just address the proposition as they did, is is it a, is the problem to be a virgin at 27? Then you're only asking, then you're not asking that question in context, because if you're saying, well, Nick Fuentes is waiting until marriage and he wants to meet the right woman, then I'd say absolutely, more power to him. You go, you live your life the way you want to live it. But the problem with Fuentes is we've got quotes from him on the record. He has said, for example, that he doesn't want to get married until he's about 30, and only if he can marry a 16-year-old, because she will be fresh. These are his words, because she would be fresh, unblemished, untouched. And when he was 40, she would be 26. And when he was 50, she'd be 36. And now you're cooking with gas, he says. He has said he doesn't want to talk with women because he finds them difficult to be around. He has said he only wants to engage with women in a particular way if he can be the dominant person in the relationship and tell them what to do. He has said things that are relentlessly misogynist and anti-woman. So I think, if you're talking about somebody like that being a virgin, and I think this is where Laura's point got a bit lost. You are, if you are falling into that guy's trap and saying going to defend him for being a virgin, you've got to look at the full context in which he's saying it. He's not some dude out there who's respecting women and not sleeping around because he's more respect for himself and doesn't want to engage in that kind of carnal activity. This is somebody who openly advocates the fact that women his own age are too old for him and would prefer to sleep with 16-year-old virgins who are children. So yeah, I think you can slag him in that context for being a virgin. And I think you can also say that it is interesting that he is leading this movement of people and young men down this path towards believing these things, in which case, yeah, I think your virginity is on the table as a matter of public discussion, because it's about where all this culture of incelibacy or involuntary celibacy is taking a generation of young men. And in that context, I think is a conversation worth having.
I still just think that if you talk about his virginity and not address the actual points that you're talking about, you're making it seem like his virginity is something that basically removes him from being worthy of having conversations about culture and dating and who, the relations between men and women. And I think that when there are people out there who are virgins who are in their 20s, and I wouldn't want them to think there was anything wrong with that.
No, I wouldn't either. I do want people to think there's something wrong with saying that you'd like to marry a 16-year-old girl when you're 30.
Well,
So there is something wrong with that. I think that says is something. Yeah. Yeah, but I think the problem is that when you connect those two things together, and when you're saying that's the reason you're a virgin, because you don't think it's worthy, they're women your own age are worthy of sleeping with you because they'll be too old when you're older. Like, that's not about, I mean, when the Catholic Church preaches chastity, as I understand it preaches it as a matter of respect, not a matter of loathing and disdain. If your virginity is about the fact that you loathe and disdain women and only want one who's so young that you can dominate her, then I think it's a different thing to your virginity being a decision about respect. And I think it's two different things. But the other thing about Fuentes is that, of course, he says these things because there's a hint of truth to them. And I was saying to you before air, I was listening during the week to an Andrew Tate podcast, which he did with some lady of Lebanese extraction whose name I can't remember. And I was struck listening to him about how much that he says has a basis in truth. When he's talking about how it is women and feminism, for example, that has changed the rules of the dating game over the last 30, 40 years. I mean, I know you listen to some of his podcasts. Do you take that from it as well?
Well, yeah, I mean, I haven't listened to anything that he said in a while, in probably a couple of years now. Funnily enough, I think the last thing I listened to was his interview with Candace Owens, which was quite interesting. That must be a year and a half or so ago. But I think there's two things. I think that the way those people work, and the same with Nick Fuentes, is that they make these points that have, as you say, elements of truth to them, and then they expand them, and they get to a logical point at which you start to disagree with them, which is fine. But another thing that I'm always deeply suspicious of is the likes of Nick Fuentes. You know, they're allowed on to programs like his name's just gone out of my
Piers
head there.
Morgan.
Piers Morgan.
Piers Morgan.
As spokespeople for the right. And I often wonder, is it deliberate that they pick these people who say these things that an initial glance look like reasonable, and people like you and I agree with them, but they know that actually after a few questions they start coming out with this mad stuff, and it makes everybody who's on that of that view look like we're all mad. Like they're picked. They're I'm not back to the conspiracy theorists, but you really would wonder, like, why him? Why Nick Fuentes?
So I think this is an Irish thing, because I think if you're Irish and you follow RTE, then you know this is one of the oldest RTE tricks in the book, right? They will pick, if there's something that RTE doesn't agree with, a social cause or an issue, they will pick the most extreme and the weakest possible advocate for that, and then they'll put them on television and like watch them flounder. They won't pick an articulate advocate for a cause they disagree with.
Yeah.
That is true. I don't know that that's the case with the likes of, Tate and Fuentes and Candace Owens and these people. They've got massive global audiences, massively beyond the reach of the United States or wherever they're based.
Now they do.
Of people who are voluntarily tuning in and consuming this content.
Well, so now they do. First of all, I think Candace Owens didn't start out. Something has happened with Candace Owens in the last couple of years. She did not start out like this. I think Nick Fuentes and Andrew Tate. Andrew Tate has always had highly controversial views from the very beginning. And I think that there's a kind of a thrill in some media outlets to put them on to show people how dangerous people who have views like, conservative views can be. I don't think that's just an Irish thing, John. And I think some of the reason why they have so many followers is because they've been profiled by those media outlets from the very beginning.
No, because I think Candace Owens disproves that, because as you say, she didn't start out this direction, but now she's really popular that she's gone this direction. Her popularity has massively increased since she went a bit wackadoodle. That's what the audience wants. And this brings it, because I obviously, I do this podcast. I'm also the editor of an Irish right-wing media outlet, an online Irish right-wing media outlet. And there is constantly massive pressure on me, exerted from the political right, to move more in this direction or that direction, or say more edgy or extreme things, because that's what a section of the audience wants. And I think when I look at this, what I see is what happens when you essentially give into that, is that you the problem with the American right-wing media is that they're also terrified of the audience, that self-policing, internal self-policing has completely gone, because if you are seen to have enemies to the right, you are the enemy yourself. And so there's always somebody to your right willing to say the edgier thing than you are. And so you might start off listening to or I don't know, reading National Review or reading hotair.com or Red State or one of the kind of mainstream kind of right-wingy sites, and then all of a sudden you discover somebody who's pushing a slightly harder material, and then eventually you end up with Nick Fuentes telling you that the blacks and other races are inferior to you. I think that's the problem. It's the lack of internal policing in right-wing media that has allowed this to happen. And I also think something bad has happened with the kids, and I can't figure out what it is yet.
With the kids?
Yeah, the Generation Z, the generation that votes, if they're women, for the communists and if they're blokes for the Nazis. You see it in Germany, you see it in France, you see it everywhere else, the massive gender divide, this generation of young people who are barely dating, barely meeting each other in public, barely, according to the figures, having sex or relationships at all, never mind being virgins, and who are becoming really politically radicalized on gender lines. I think it is those pressing crises of our age. Do you not?
Yeah. You think that having a boyfriend is a cringe?
Yeah, do you remember that article in what was it, a couple of weeks ago? It was kind of like it was cool not to have a boyfriend.
No, that it was that you were embarrassed if you had a boyfriend. That you cringed to tell your friends that you had a boyfriend. It was something to be ashamed of. Weird.
Yeah. And I mean, there you go. That's what it's all about. Speaking of that, I mean, tell me about this article that you read in the Times about how the Brits want to teach young boys not to hate women.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. So the basically the UK government is introducing mandatory anti-misogyny lessons in all schools in England, with a plan to have it rolled out by or full implementation required by September of next year, 2026. They're part of a national strategy to tackle violence against women and girls, with specific programs aimed at boys as young as 11 who exhibit concerning behavior. What concerning behavior is, not yet defined. Challenging misogynistic behavior, not yet defined. And will involve a specific aspect of it involves behavior change programs for high risk boys aged 11 and up who show harmful attitudes, not yet defined, or influenced by online figures promoting misogyny like Andrew Tate. Now, what do you first of all, just absolutely not. I find this offensive as having two sons, and I'd be deeply, deeply concerned on who it is who's actually defining what high risk, what harmful, what any of those criteria actually mean. A boy who wants to play football and says girls are stupid, is he high risk? Like you just know where it's going. A more overreach, more cultural nonsense, more. Why can't teachers just teach? Well, like, at what point did education become the kind of brainwashing vehicle for an ideological position that somebody, some lefty somewhere has come up with? Just go in and learn your maths and your geography and your history. Thanks very much. Let parents do the parenting. It's none of anybody's business what some random teacher thinks my son need to be trained in. Absolutely not.
I mean, I'm less concerned, if I'm honest, about the role of the teacher than the effectiveness of it. I mean, I just think it's also. I'm going to say it. I just think it's also feminized, right? It's the idea that you're a young 13-year-old lad and you're listening there to Andrew Tate, and instead I listened to one of his podcasts, and Andrew Tate is telling you that like you're an idiot if you ever get married. That women will sleep around with 5 or 6 guys, and then they'll find a sucker who they'll settle down with and get married. And the world is against you if you're a successful man, and women are jealous of you. And then what? Some middle-aged teacher is going to tell you that that's wrong, and you're going to listen.
Yeah, I
It's
know.
it's so nonsensical as to be completely like if I asked Andrew Tate and Fuentes and all these other kind of influencers who I think are toxic, they understand young men far better than policymakers do.
Because
I
that's
think they
because
do. They
that's
understand.
because they're the only ones who haven't been telling those boys and men that there's something wrong with them for the last 10 years.
Yeah, that's very true. I think there's something in the culture with if I could put my finger on it, which is the pathologization or pathology turning into a pathogen normal male sexual desire. I think
Yeah.
that is something that has happened in the culture over the last 15 years. The idea that a man who looks at you slightly too long, if you're a woman, I mean, it does nothing else now. And see, even I feel the need to expand on what I'm saying. Say a man who looks at a woman for half a beat longer than he would if he wasn't attracted, is in some way engaged in toxic masculinity, or the idea that like flirting in the workplace is automatically terrible all the time, and all of which is designed to insulate women from kind of ordinary male sexuality as it has been expressed over the last 500 to 2,000 years. I think that is the real issue with what's happened with the culture. And basically, tell me if I'm wrong, because I'm throwing out a theory here, and I want your opinion on it. Is that everything we have done has been to try and like restrain young men from expressing what up until 5 minutes ago in the evolutionary time chart was normal, basic human sexuality from a male perspective.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's opened the door to all this nonsense. Do you think I'm
100%.
wrong?
No, 100%. And now they don't know what to do or how to do it or what's offensive or what's not. And that's why a lot of the normal dating things, I was just talking about this to somebody recently, and they were telling me they're in their early 30s and single, and they were saying like nobody meets in bars, nobody, guys don't come up, groups of guys don't go out and go up to groups of girls because they don't know what they're allowed to do and not allowed to do. Their brains are fried at this point. And it's because they've been told there's something wrong with them and that you look too long, you're a weirdo. You text too much, you're a stalker. Everything is suddenly a crime. So, you need consent classes. You need this. You shouldn't watch that. You shouldn't say this. That's problematic. You shouldn't look. You shouldn't say this. You shouldn't say you look nice. I mean, there's so many TV programs, like you just see it all the time. Like just everything a man does. He says, oh, wear that nice dress you wore before. Don't tell me what to wear. Everything men do, they can't do anything right. So that's what we're teaching boys. Stay away. Don't talk to girls. Don't look at them. Don't do this. Don't do that. So no wonder their brains are fried. And it's very,
and
very.
At the same time, the culture is completely sexualized. Like you can't flick through TikTok without seeing some scantily clad woman dancing in a provocative way. You can't turn on your TV without seeing heaving bosoms and a bra and an ad for something. And that is before you get into the whole area of internet porn. And I think you've eradicated the sort of normal male-female ability to flirt in person. That's kind of gone.
Yeah.
Because as you say, there are so many rules now. And you've also at the same time kind of like taken sexuality and put it into the virtual sphere. Where you've got the opportunity to kind of form relationships with people on TikTok or Snapchat or even AI models. You've got porn there. You've got there was a terrifying article. It's a terrifying article in one of the magazines. I think it was, which one was it called? I remember by the end of the podcast. But a terrible article on the rise of this whole gooner culture, which I won't explain to you, Sarah, if you don't know what it is, but it's nothing tasteful. And how young men are kind of withdrawing in large numbers from the dating pool because of how all of this has kind of warped their inability to interact with women. And I don't think the solution to that is more hectoring lectures about like not listening to Andrew Tate.
But I think all of this, women, girls and boys, but all of it comes under the umbrella of that, there's all kinds of problems, but the result is that I think you have a generation of people who are really, really lonely.
Yeah, 100%.
And that's manifesting as anger in some people, like your Nick Fuentes and those kind of people, kind of a rage. Why not me? And, nobody wants me, so I'll hate them first. And then women, stay away from me, don't look at me, don't talk to me, because, just a lot of really sad, kind of lonely people who've been told that
these ones.
The last thing you need is a man, and a woman needs a man like a fish needs a bicycle, and all this shite that's been thrown at them their whole lives. And now a lot of them are getting into their 20s and their 30s and their late 30s and saying, oh my God, all of a sudden, I actually wouldn't mind having a kid and I wouldn't mind having this life or whatever. And they've been told for the last 15 years to tell every member of the opposite sex that looked at them to F off.
Yeah, there's a particular genre of video that's getting a bit of attention recently where I'm sure you've come across them at some stage, which is kind of like the female influencer in the gym who is wearing skin tight clothing that leaves absolutely nothing to the imagination. And then like some poor unfortunate lad walks past her while she's doing her workout and looks. And then the video is all about how this absolute creep, he's looked at me. And like it's so incredibly toxic because you've gone there dressed that way, knowing it'll get attention, and then a guy has done something inherently natural and not, by the way, offensive to you at all, hasn't invaded your space, and you're making a deal out of that being perverted. I mean, there's a lot of that stuff about, and I think the internet is just warping young people in ways that were not foreseeable but are very, very real.
Yeah.
Anyway, I think we'll talk more about this on future podcasts because it's an endlessly interesting topic. And by the way, all these other people, they talk about it and they get millions and millions and millions of views. And you and I are actually intelligent people who've navigated all this sort of stuff in our relatively recent lives, within the last 10, 15 years. So we should talk more about it moving forward. But we can't end the podcast without talking about what happened in Australia just a week ago with the massive massacre of 15 primarily Jewish people on a beach there, and the kind of not only the horror of that attack, which goes without saying, we don't need to go into any detail on the horror about it, but the sort of the politics of it afterwards, with sort of a lot of people saying this was inevitable, a result of a lot of kind of over the top pro-Palestinian rhetoric, and then other people saying it's absolutely crazy and this is the Israelis weaponizing a terror attack. I'm not even going to ask you where you come down on that, but I kind of like your general thoughts on it.
I mean, I think I've been to Australia and I've been to Bondi Beach, and it's for a lot of people, it's really like symbolizes a really happy place. So I think the whole thing is just horrifying that you could be out on Bondi Beach in the nice weather and something like this would happen. But I I mean, the media reaction, and Micheál Martin puts out a statement first where he doesn't acknowledge at all that it's Jewish people. Things like that. Like, am I surprised? No. Is it depressing? Yes. Is the world becoming a scarier and scarier place? Yes. Just seems like a never ending stream of horror in terms of murder and people being murdered and war. And, I don't think that it I don't think that it damages your reputation for being strongly on the side of the Palestinian people to acknowledge that the people who got murdered on Bondi Beach are Jewish. And I think the fact that people find that...
I don't even think it's about...
Sorry, go on.
I don't even think it's about that or the acknowledgement. I think a lot of the anger is about sort of the rhetoric that led up to it. Now, I think for clarity, I think it's absolutely insane for anyone to suggest that some wine mom in Westport, County Mayo, who's posted on her Instagram with a Palestinian flag and kind of gone free Gaza, is responsible for the assassination of and murder of Jewish people in Australia. So I'm not saying that for a moment. But I will say that if you think back to, we've had incidences in this country of violence and despicable violence. We've had instances of, I don't remember the migrant hotel that was set on fire in Galway. There was a recent attack on a migrant centre in Dundalk. There have been other instances of places being, the result of arson attacks. And thankfully, nobody has died in those attacks thus far. But after every single one of them, the political refrain from our friends on the left is the same, which is, this is a result of extreme anti-immigration rhetoric. And if you're talking about immigration and migrants, and you're talking about it in a particular way, you as good as lit the match. And every time immigration is discussed on Irish television, some government representative or some NGO representative has to go on and say a particular phrase, which is, we've got to be very careful with our language when we're discussing this issue.
Yeah.
People have heard it. People have heard that phrase.
Yeah.
So then why are you outraged when people suggest that maybe you should be careful with your language when you're discussing an issue of major geopolitical significance like the Middle East, and when there are people out there who are likely to take what they see as vigilante action against Jewish people in Australia, for God's sake? Why can't you see the link between your rhetoric and violent action against Jews, but you can see the link between my alleged rhetoric and violent action against migrants? I think that's an issue that the Irish government, and indeed many other governments, but particularly the Irish government, should be asking themselves. Or do you think am I being unfair?
No, I think you're not being unfair, but I don't think the rhetoric of either is... everybody knows hate speech when they see it. Everybody knows rhetoric. I think we just too quickly go into a who's to blame on everything as opposed to the actual person who's to blame. Do you know what I mean? Like, a father and a son went onto the beach with guns and started shooting everybody. And it's not the fault, as you say, of somebody who has a Palestinian, but that's completely absurd. But it's also not the fault, as you say, of the squabbling over the rhetoric and the language. Is just a way that is used to distract ourselves from having a real hard conversation about some of these issues. That's my opinion.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, it is apparent in this case that the younger of the two men, the son, these are Australian media reports, and obviously they haven't been found to be true at trial or everything, but take them with a pinch of salt, but I think a reasonably small pinch of salt. is that he was radicalized and was a member of ISIS. I do think there is a genuine question to be asked about the proportion of members of one religion who are radicalized compared to the proportion of members of any other religion in society who are radicalized. There is one religion in the Western world that has a persistent radicalization problem across all borders, across all boundaries, across all civilizations, and across all languages. There's one particular religious family, and that is the Islamic religious family, that has this persistent. I mean, I'm not saying, for the record, sir, I'm not saying you don't find people of other religions who are radicalized and carry out terrorist attacks.
I know.
Absolutely do. What I'm saying is you don't find them as consistent in one religious group across all borders, boundaries, nations, and cultures. And I think that is a conversation that needs to be had. And the thing that I find absolutely sickening is the way the heroism of Ahmed al-Ahmed, who saved the lives or tried to save the lives of so many people, was immediately weaponized. As in, like, here's a true Muslim man saving the Jews. And I'm sitting there looking at my computer going, yeah, he's a hero. But who was he saving them from, mate? You know? Like,
Yeah.
You can't just pick, this is the good Muslim and these other people weren't real Muslims at all. Because there are a whole lot of incidents carried out by people who apparently weren't real Muslims at all. At some point, you've got to ask the question, what is it about your religious faith that produces radicals in this number who carry out attacks in this number? And I think you have to ask that question honestly and expect an honest answer. What is it? And if your answer is, it's the evil badness of the West, my follow-up answer is, well, if we're so bad and evil, why the fuck are you all coming here then? Sorry.
But also, you can't take someone's Muslimness as the inherent part of their goodness that made them stop the terrorist and ignore, as you say, their Muslimness when they're doing something wrong. Do you know what I mean? We don't look, I think what you're talking about is a conversation, exactly like I said, it's a conversation, a hard conversation, and we're allergic to having hard conversations. Whatever about it in the entire world, but certainly in Ireland. We will squabble over who's to blame.
We have hard conversations about young men. We have that.
Yeah.
Sorry, no, this is a point. Sorry, no, I'm interrupting you, but I just want to say this. We've no problem putting all young men into a box and saying, well, young men are a problem and they need to be trained out of their misogyny. But God forbid we put one particular religious group into a box and say there might be a systemic issue within that faith. Doesn't apply to everybody, but there might be a systemic issue. Can't do that. That's offensive. I mean, for God's sake.
But that's because what you're talking about are, as we have discussed on this podcast many times before, is that there's protected classes of people and there's non-protected classes of people, and young white privileged males in Ireland and the UK do not belong to a privileged or a protected class of people. They're literally the lowest of the low. They're the easiest. There's the lowest hanging fruit in terms of taking a hop off them for their very existence. That's free game, fair game. Go for your life.
All right. Okay, look, we'll park it there. Before we go, I was going to ask you, like, fondest memory of 2025 for you.
Oh, you can't put me on the spot.
I've just put her on the spot.
Oh, that's really unfair. There was so many. Give me a hint. I mean, okay, so let's break it into categories.
I can't give you a hint as to what your fondest memory was.
No, jog my memory. From political, this is mean, but like from political entertainment and like fun and whatever, Jim Gavin pulling out of the presidential election was pretty interesting for political nerds like us to watch. I think that was fascinating. That was politically my favorite.
For me, I think probably my outside of, and by the way, it goes without saying, folks, that Sarah and I both have private lives and families and stuff, and we've all had happy memories in our families. So we're talking about stuff that happened publicly. For me, it's probably Rory McIlroy winning the Masters and Shane Lowry winning the Ryder Cup. I'm not even a big golf fan, not glued to the golf or anything. I don't play very much, but I just thought that was such a tremendous sporting moment. On a personal level, I think
Troy Parrott scoring that goal, that was cool.
Yes, it was. It was. Yeah, that was big, especially for the kids, I think. I think when you're a child, the thing about the Troy Parrott goal is I still remember where I was for Robbie Keane's last minute equaliser against Germany in the 2002 World Cup in Korea.
Yeah.
The Troy Parrott memory, if you're a child watching that, you will remember it for your life, I think.
Yeah.
So that's a
Yeah.
that's a big moment. Politically, I just don't think there were many highs this year. On a personal level, my most read article this year, apart from some of my most read articles were sort of on the Irish-Israeli thing, which I won't repeat here, but my most read article was the one on sort of the Maria Steen campaign and Michael McDowell, which was read very, very widely. And, you know, I was really proud of that as a piece of journalism, just because it had the entirety of the inside story. And it annoyed certain members of the Senate. That wasn't the aim of it, just had the byproduct of doing so. So I enjoyed that. And I've also enjoyed the rise of Gript and the continued rise of this podcast with you. Our listenership has reached record highs this year. It's been growing from strength to strength. You've all joined us. And I know that people have been annoyed with me from time to time for doing the Trump derangement syndrome. And you're always very grateful to Sarah for stepping in with her little interventions. But, you know, doing this podcast with you has been a real highlight of the year, I have to say. I've enjoyed it.
Yeah, me too. And it grows and grows. And also, you're reminding me that there was a couple of highlights, which I think I mentioned it kind of briefly, but it's when people come up to you. And when I was waiting for one of my first interventions into my spine, before I knew what was really going on, but I was getting pain. I met a woman in the changing room, in the waiting room in the hospital. And I was chatting to her and she said, "Oh, your voice sounds like exactly like that girl who does that podcast with John McGurk." And I was like, "It's me." And little things like that during the year, it's so nice when people stop you and say they listen and say, "Oh, I can't, you know, they always say, like, I can't say it at work, or I can't say this, or I can't say that, but I listen and it makes me feel like I'm not losing my mind." So they're all the highlights when people say that. It's so nice.
Well, we look forward to continuing this many times, at least 50 episodes or so in 2026. And on that, Sarah and I will not be with you, and there will be no edition of The Week That Really Was next week, because who wants to listen to us on Boxing Day?
Yeah, no one.
Or, sorry, St. Stephen's Day.
Yeah,
right.
sorry.
And we are going to be doing our Christmas stuff. And then the week after that, which is I think the 1st of January, I will be overseas, but Sarah will be here to open the year with a very special guest who I think, is it a very special guest to whom you're married?
Yeah. The return,
Okay.
the triumphant
All right,
return of Mr. Redmond.
Okay. All right. Well, Sarah and Keith will open the year for you, and then I will be back the week after that. But from Sarah and I, just a heartfelt thanks to all of you who've listened to us over the last year, and all of you who've come up and said hello to us, and all of you have, you know, subscribed to Gript or helped us in some way. We hugely appreciate it, and we want to wish you a very happy Christmas and a wonderful 2026. But from Sarah and from me, from now, for now, God, it was going so well. For now, toodaloo.